February 25, 2025, Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social account a 30-second video clip which appears to have been created with generative AI and was first put online by somebody with no connection to the White House. The clip, which promotes the transformation of Gaza into a Gulf state-like resort, opens on barefoot Palestinian children walking through Gazan rubble. After a title card asks what's next, they walk towards a skyline of skyscrapers lining Gaza's coast, and a voice sings Donald's coming to set you free. Trump Gaza shining bright. Golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance. The deed is done. The scenes shown are Teslas driving through the streets, someone with a striking resemblance to Elon Musk eating bread dipped in hummus, Hamas militants with full beards dancing flirtatiously in bikinis and sheer belly dancing skirts, a child holding a giant, gold Trump balloon, Trump dancing with a scantily clad woman in a nightclub, Musk showering people with cash, a Trump Gaza building, golden Trump merch including his statues on sale, a gigantic golden Trump statue, Trump and Netanyahu lounging topless poolside while enjoying cocktails. Point 1. In whatever way one understands this clip, Palestinians are deprived of minimal dignity, and dignity is important to them, in spite of or rather because of their misery. On October 20, 2024, after a 3-year-old Palestinian boy was killed by airdropped aid in the southern city of Khan Yunis in Gaza, his grandfather said, "We don't want aid. We want dignity. Enough with the humiliation and insult that we are receiving from the Arabs, not just the Israelis." 2. It is easy to make fun of this weird clip, but it deserves a deeper analysis with even philosophical implications. Lacan claims that truth has the structure of a fiction. Some traumatic or intense truths are easier accepted if we present them as moments of a fictitious game. Say, I am passionately in love, but I am ashamed to declare it openly, so I use the situation where we both play the role of lovers in a theater scene to say it, knowing that it will not be attributed to me as a person. In today's political propaganda, the strategy is simpler. Fiction has the structure of truth, i.e., a lie is presented as truth. The Trump Gaza clip fits neither of these two options. The first impression it gives us when we watch it is, of course, that of a tasteless satire, of ridiculous irony, but when Trump himself posted it on his Truth Social account, it looks as if he appropriated it seriously, taking it as a possible vision of Gaza in the near future. Or was he aware that the clip was meant ironically and consciously decided to function in his real life as his own caricature? The most probable version is that Trump didn't think about it a lot at all. He saw it as a funny, crazy clip and thought it will raise controversy and make me even more popular, so why not? There are cases where the relationship between truth and fiction gets even more complex. In mid-February 2025, reports circulated that Israel's military were dropping leaflets across the Gaza Strip which openly threatened the territory's entire population of more than 2 million people with forced displacement and death. Here is the message to the honorable people of Gaza: after the events that have taken place, the temporary ceasefire, and before the implementation of Trump's mandatory plan, which will impose forced displacement upon you whether you accept it or not, we have decided to make one final appeal to those who wish to receive aid in exchange for cooperating with us. We will not hesitate for a moment to provide assistance. Reconsider your position. The world map will not change if all the people of Gaza cease to exist. No one will feel for you, and no one will ask about you. You have been left alone to face your inevitable fate. Iran cannot even protect itself, let alone protect you, and you have seen with your own eyes what has happened. Neither America nor Europe care about Gaza in any way. Even your Arab countries, which are now our allies, provide us with money and weapons while sending you only shrouds. There is little time left, the game is almost over. Whoever wishes to save themselves before it is too late, we are here, remaining until the end of time. To add an obscene insult to injury, the message includes a passage from the Quran: we will certainly test you with a touch of fear and famine and loss of property, life, and crops. Give good news to those who patiently endure, who say, when struck by a disaster, surely to Allah we belong and to Him we will all return. 3. I think these leaflets, on the top of which there are photos of Netanyahu and Trump, are fake, false news, but done by whom? Not the Palestinians, but by unofficial Israeli sources as a part of the complex psychological warfare the public diplomacy of Israel, called Hasbara, roughly translated as explaining, is a well-coordinated massive effort to justify measures which are perceived as unacceptable by global opinion. The explaining is done in multiple forms, by official state organs, private organizations, and visible public figures, artists, journalists, scientists, but also as anonymous rumors spreading conspiracy theories or faked documents attributed to the enemy. Another Hasbara strategy is to allow, or solicit, lower-level political figures often state openly what top leaders don't say openly or even deny such statements, although not widely reported in the media, explain what the more polite statements of top politicians imply. For example, Owen Jones has shown on his podcast a recorded statement by the Israeli Deputy Parliament Speaker Nissim Vatui which says, "Who is innocent in Gaza? Civilians went out and slaughtered people in cold blood. We need to separate women and children and kill the adults in Gaza, we are being too considerate." And then he makes an even further step, including children. Every child born now, in this minute, is already a terrorist when he is born, for this is in no way a mistake but part of a well-planned complex strategy. The amount of work grew exponentially so that the Israeli Hasbara machinery had to rely also on AI. The Israeli government decided to use AI-generated pro-Israel content and astroturfed social media campaigns. One of the new AI bots, which was reported in the press, was branded as FactFinder AI. It was designed to correct misinformation, reconcile the paradoxes of Hasbara, automate and expand Hasbara campaigns, and reinforce Zionist narratives. However, when exposed to the real data landscape, the bot encountered undeniable realities: Israel's history of occupation, apartheid, and war crimes, and, instead of ignoring them, as Zionist Hasbara does, the AI bot began processing them into responses. Israel's AI Hasbara campaign backfired spectacularly, because even AI, when confronted with historical records, existing media narratives, and empirical data, could not fabricate a coherent pro-Israel stance because there is no coherent pro-Israel stance. Point 5 The result was thus that AI glitches happen from time to time, glitches which are not just a technical malfunction, it is a symbolic rupture, an inevitable revelation of the inherent failure of Zionist ideology it was designed to serve. 6. And what if the genocide leaflet is something similar, not simply a glitch, but a second-level fake, a fake document whose very, rather obvious, glitches? The leaflet is printed on paper with Shin Bet marks, the reference to Quran is ridiculous, no Muslim Arab would write like that, were intended and serve a precise function. What if the true goal of the discoverer of this leaflet was to sow doubt about its own authenticity, but at the same time leaving behind the vague impression that there must be some truth even in this fiction? But with such glitches, we didn't yet reach the level of Trump speak, which works in a different way. Trump doesn't even try to mask contradictions or constant shifts in his position. From day to day, he blurts out what pops up in his mind, not, as some think, as part of his mental confusion, but as the result of his fully conscious assumption of the role of a master beyond law and logic, a master who asserts his power by way of constantly changing what he claims. One day Zelensky is a legitimate leader of Ukraine to be received in the White House, the next day he is a dictator. One day Russia attacked Ukraine, the next day Ukraine defends itself against Russian aggression. One day EU is a respected partner reproached just for not doing enough for the West. The next day Trump says EU was formed to screw the US. A true master doesn't just obey the rules and laws. From time to time, he makes an unexpected gesture, changes a political line, condemns or pardons a person, without giving any clear reasons. Such changes are a way for the master to assert his unconditional authority. When, usually in late evenings, Stalin was confirming long lists of people to be shot, he from time to time inexplicably crossed out a name, although in all probability he didn't even know who that person was. The total opacity of such acts made his authority unconditional. However, there is a difference here between Stalin and Trump. What was with Stalin an exception to the reign of a brutal law is for Trump a modus operandi. Trump is here effectively an anti-Stalin, not that this makes him any better. To paraphrase Stalin, Trump and Stalin are both worse. In both cases, factual truth takes second place. However, in Stalinism, the ignorance of factual truth is part of a precise hermeneutic. Never make the real into an instrument of the conquest of reality. And I would allow myself to add, never make revolution into the lever of an absolute power. The second line of the Ukrainian national anthem, "Fate luck still smiles on us, fellow Ukrainians," sadly no longer holds. Much worse, we should extend this retreat of luck to Europe itself. Fate luck no longer smiles on us, fellow Europeans. The situation is now so serious that the same old points should be repeated again and again. Perhaps they will find more resonance today now that the crisis has broken out openly. To anyone who follows our media, it is more than obvious how US President Donald Trump's new administration has thrown our time out of joint in both domestic and foreign policy. But why should Europe be the one chosen to set the time straight? The reason is not just that it seems to be the big loser of Trump's new global politics. Some of us still remember the famous opening of the Communist Manifesto, "A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism." All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this spectre. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Gizet, French radicals and German police spies. Could we not use the same words to characterize the status of Europe in today's public perception? A spectre is haunting the world, the spectre of Eurocentrism. All the powers of old Europe and of the New World Order have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this spectre. Nigel Farage and Russian President Vladimir Putin, AfD, and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, pro-immigrant anti-racists and protectors of traditional European values, Latin American leftists and Arab conservatives, West Bank Zionists and Chinese patriotic communists. There is a profound similarity between Trump's attacks on the triad of environmentalism, political correctness, and LGBT+ rights and the conflict between Russia and Europe. One should ask a simple question: which civilization today fully embodies the triad attacked by Trump? Only one, European civilization, as the latest form of enlightenment. In an interview on July 15, 2018, just after a stormy meeting with EU leaders, Trump mentioned the European Union as the first in the line of foes of the US, ahead of Russia and China. What Trump tries to do is dissolve European unity, and his efforts are finding an echo in more and more European states: Hungary, Germany, Austria, the UK. During the Munich Security Conference, the first act of US Vice President J.D. Vance was to launch a brutal ideological assault on Europe, accusing its leaders of suppressing free speech, failing to halt illegal migration, and running in fear from voters' true beliefs. He openly questioned whether current European values warranted defense by the U.S. Europe today is a terrain of ideological and political struggle. Many ideas of Europe compete and exist in a kind of superposition: the conservative notion of Europe as a space of Christian sovereign states, the technocratic vision of Europe as an economic unity, and more. So which Europe bothers Trump as well as European populists? It is the Europe of transnational unity, the Europe vaguely aware that, to cope with the challenges of our moment, we must move beyond the constraints of nation-states. It is the Europe that also desperately strives to remain faithful to the old Enlightenment motto of solidarity with victims, the Europe aware that humanity is now one, that we are all on the same boat, or, as we say, on the same spaceship Earth, so that others' misery is also our problem. This brings us to the scandalous performance called the Munich Security Conference. Timothy Garton Ash raised the question apropos of the Munich conference: will the peace be like Chamberlain's peace for our time? My answer is that it could turn out to be even worse, because our time is a new time of BRICS multipolarity. Both prospects of peace in which Trump's administration is now engaged, Gaza and Ukraine, are exemplary cases of how the BRICS world that is now emerging will function. Yes, it will be multipolar, but in the sense of a few strong states each defining its own sphere of influence and limiting the sovereignty of its smaller neighbors. Trump's foreign policy fully fits the BRICS world. He admits Ukraine is in Russia's sphere of influence while insisting that Canada, Greenland, Mexico, and Panama are in the US sphere of influence. Trump, admits Ukraine is in Russia's sphere of influence while insisting that Canada, Greenland, Mexico, and Panama are in the US sphere of influence. That's why he immediately engaged in negotiations with Putin, openly excluding Europe from peace talks. Even when Trump and Putin disagree on many things, they already speak the same language. No wonder Trump also said that Russia should rejoin the G7, signaling a general renormalization of Russia. So it is not just that Europe should unite to become one more big power within the BRICS space, it should become an exception, a place that offers support to the victims of the new BRICS superpowers, each of which defines its own sphere of influence. The announced US takeover of Gaza demonstrates what happens within a superpower's sphere of influence. To put it bluntly, you do what you want, dropping all pretense. When Trump announced his plan to take over Gaza, we found ourselves back at the two-state solution rejected by Israel, only with one minor detail changed. The two states are not Israel and Palestine, but Israel and the United States. So, what will happen if Trump succeeds and peace prevails in an ethnically cleansed Greater Israel? Shakespeare wrote, "The evil that men do lives after them, the good is oft interred with their bones." The horror with Trump is even worse. If his evil deeds succeed, they will be remembered as good, as something that brought peace. The peace plan advocated by the US will leave Ukraine caught between two colonizations. The eastern part will be directly annexed by Russia, while the western part will be turned into a de facto economic colony, with large portions of its fertile land already owned by Western corporations, its natural resources plundered, etc. For Trump, a peace guarantee means guarantees from both sides, Ukraine and Russia, that the US will have free access to Ukraine's natural resources to cover the costs of its military aid to Ukraine. So Russia will keep part of its cake, and the US will eat part of it, with Ukraine left with nothing, at best, some symbolic titles. So what can Europe do in what former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis describes as Europe's last chance to seize autonomy from the US? Many things. Regarding Gaza, Europe could go beyond condemning the Trump takeover and simply organize a large relief operation, bringing food, medical equipment, tents, and other necessities by sea and from Egypt. If the US, not just Israel, were to block this aid, the already obvious truth would be even harder to ignore. As for Ukraine, Europe must draw the consequences of what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in Munich on February 15, 2025, let's be honest. Now we can't rule out the possibility that America might say no to Europe on an issue that threatens it. Many leaders have talked about Europe needing its own military, an army of Europe. Ukraine now faces a difficult choice between the US and Europe. Until now, it has been able to rely on both, but the crack is now wide open. The US message is clear: negotiations will begin between Washington and Moscow, with Kiev joining later, its role reduced to signing whatever the two major powers decide. The implicit threat? If Kiev refuses, it will be left to fend for itself, alongside Europe, which is conspicuously excluded from the talks, despite the war unfolding on its soil. Statements by US Vice President J.D. Vance against Europe make it clear that the real target of the US shift on Ukraine is not Ukraine itself, but Europe, specifically, its emancipatory legacy. The US message is clear: negotiations will begin between Washington and Moscow, with Kiev joining later, its role reduced to signing whatever the two major powers decide. The question that lingers behind all this is, will Putin take the negotiations seriously at all, or are they just another step in Russia's continuous expansion? The answer is not buried deep in Russia's soul. It depends largely on how others respond to Russian politics. So, again, what should and could Europe do to assert itself as an autonomous power? First, Europe must clearly redefine itself, and here, problems already arise, with states and populist forces opposing both a united Europe and its emancipatory legacy. Second, part of this redefinition is military autonomy. John Bolton predicts that Trump will withdraw the US from NATO. Let's hope this happens, and NATO becomes the armed force of a united Europe. Third, Europe will have to rethink its economic policy toward greater coordination and, to use the prohibited word, planning. Large-scale, obligatory planning, not just vague coordination or collaboration, is the only way to confront the crises threatening our very survival. Planning in times of multiple crises must combine features that may appear mutually exclusive, while outcomes cannot be fully predicted, let alone planned. This very unpredictability demands rigorous preparation. In short, even though crises cannot be planned, they require a great deal of planning. After carefully outlining competing tendencies, we must act with full awareness that unexpected consequences may force us to shift course. Does this sound utopian? Absolutely not. Just look at some of the world's most successful economies, where the state plays a central role in regulating and directing economic activity, from Switzerland and Singapore to South Korea. In other words, the stance Europe should adopt today is one of principled pragmatism. Groucho Marx once said, "These are my principles, and if you don't like them, well, I have others." This is the formula of unprincipled pragmatism, when those in power change their principles merely to stay in power. In the ongoing negotiations about peace in Ukraine, Trump presents himself as a pragmatic realist, urging all sides to choose the lesser evil. But as none other than Jerry Garcia put it, constantly choosing the lesser of two evils is still choosing evil. On the other hand, there is the dogmatic advocacy of principles, sticking to them even at the cost of economic and social disruption. Principled pragmatism does not seek a middle ground between these two extremes. It means something much more precise. When circumstances change radically, we must adjust many of our particular positions precisely to remain faithful to our core principles. For Europe, the principle at stake is unconditional fidelity to the Enlightenment legacy, while the pragmatic aspect involves navigating unpredictable and difficult decisions. Europe is clearly no longer treated as the US's primary ally, so one option to consider is a strategic alliance with China against the emerging axis of the US, Russia, and India. Although China is closer to Russia in the war against Ukraine, it has sent clear signals that it does not fully support Russia's aggressive politics. Europe should seize this crisis as an opportunity to reassert itself and regain strength. French President Emmanuel Macron was right to convene an urgent summit of European leaders in Paris, but the real question is how far this group can and will go. Will it be just another declaration, an excuse to do nothing? In recent decades, Europe has been full of such declarations. So my conclusion is not cautiously optimistic, but pessimistic, with a hope that miracles can still happen. The battle is almost lost, but not yet fully lost. We constantly hear that Europe is lagging behind the US and China in digitalization and AI. However, sometimes being late is an advantage. It allows us to watch others make inevitable mistakes and enter the process in a more informed way. It is here that we should recall Nietzsche's maxim, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger."